That was what I know. Now I'm going to tell you what I think, and I may have it wrong. On some of the specifics, but it will be willing to let my watch the chain that I've got to the general outlaw down pretty well. Because of which Andy being a sort of man that he was, there was one or two ways that he could have been, and every now and then when I think it out, I think of Normand, the half-crazy Indian. Nice Della, Norman had said after the sealing with Norman had after selling with Andy for 18 months. I was glad to go. Bad draft in the cell. All the time cold. He don't let nobody touch his things. That's okay. Nice man never made fun of a big draft. Poor crazy Norman knew more than all the rest of us, and he knew it sooner. And it was 8 long months before Andy could get him out of there and have the cell to himself again. If it hadn't been for 18 months Norman had spent with him after Warden Norton first came in, I do believe that Andy would have been free before Nixon resigned. I believe now that it began in 1948, way back then, not with the rock hammer, but with the Rita Hayworth poster. I told you how nervous he seemed when he asked for that. Nervous and filled with suppressed excitement. At the time, I thought it was just embarrassment that Andy was the sort of guy who never wanted someone else to know that he had feet of clay and wanted a woman, especially if it was a fantasy woman. But I think now that I was wrong. I think now Andy's excitement came from something else altogether. What was responsible for that hole Warden Norton eventually found behind the poster of the girl that hadn't even been born with that photo of Rita Hayworth was taken. And Dufresne's perseverance and hard work, I don't take any of that. I don't take any of that away from him. But there were two other elements in the equation. A lot of luck with WPA concrete. You don't need me to explain the luck, I guess. The WPA concrete I checked out for myself. I invested some time and a couple of stamps and wrote the first to the University of Maine History Department. And then to a fellow whose address they were able to give me. The fellow had been a foreman of the WPA project that built the Shawshank Max security wing. The wing, which contained cell blocks 3, 4, and 5, was built in the years of 1934 and 1937. Now, most people don't think of cement and concrete as technological developments, the way we think of cars and oil furnaces and rocket ships, but they really are. There was no modern cement until 1870, so no modern concrete until the turn of the century. Mixing concrete is a delicate business as making bread. You can get it too watery or not watery enough. You can get the sand mixed too thick or too thin. And the same is true of the gravel mix. Back in 1934, the science of mixing stuff was a lot less sophisticated than it is today. Thus, the walls of cell block 5 were solid enough, but weren't exactly dry and toasty. As a matter of fact, they were all pretty dank. After a long wet spell, they would sweat and sometimes even drip. Cracks had a way of appearing some an inch deep. They would routinely mortared over. Now here comes Andy Dufresne into cell block 5. He's a man who graduated from University of Maine School of Business. But he's also a man who took 2 or 3 geology courses along the E-way. Geology had become his chief hobby. I imagine it appealed to his patient's meticulous nature. A 10,000-year ice age here, a million years of mountain building, Their plates of bedrock grinding against each other into the deep under earth of skin over in the millennia. Skin over the millennia. Pressure. Andy told me once that all of geology is studied of pressure. And time, of course, he had time to study those walls. Plenty of time. With the cell door slams and the lights go out, there's nothing else to look at. First timers usually have a hard time adjusting to the confinement of prison life. They get screw fever. Sometimes they have to be hauled down to the infirmary and sedated for a couple times before they get on the beam. It's not unusual to hear some new member of our happy little family banging on the bars of his cell screaming to be let out. And before the cries have gone on for long, the chant starts up along the cell block. Fresh fish. Hey little fishy. Fresh fish. Got fresh fish today? And didn't flip out like that when he came to Andy didn't flip out like that when he came to Shawshank in 1948, but that's not to say that he didn't feel many of the same things. He might have come close to madness, some do, and some go sailing right over the edge. Life blown away in the wink of an eye. Indeterminate nightmare stretch out ahead along the season in hell. So what did he do, I ask you? He searched almost desperately for something to divert his restless mind. Oh, there are all sorts of ways to divert yourself, even in prison. It seems like a human mind is full of an infinite number of possibilities. When it comes to diversion, I told you about the sculpture and his 3 ages of Jesus. There were coin collectors who were always losing their collections to thieves. Stamp collectors, one fellow who had postcards from 35 different countries, and let me tell you, he would have turned out your lights if he caught you diddling with his postcards. And he got interested in rocks in the walls of his cell. I think that his initial intention might have been to do more than to carve his initials into the wall where the poster of Rita Hayworth would soon be hanging. His initials, or maybe a few lines from some poem. Instead, what he found was an interesting weak concrete. Maybe he started to carve his initials and a big chunk of the wall just fell out. I can see him lying there on his bunk looking at that broken chunk of concrete, turning it over his hands. Never mind the wreck of your whole life. Never mind that you got railroaded into this place by a whole trainload of bad luck. Let's forget all of that. And look at the piece of concrete. Some months further along, he might have decided it would have been fun to see how much of that he could take out. But you can't just start digging into your wall, and then when the weekly inspection, or one of those surprise inspections that are always turning up interesting catches of booze, drugs, dirty pictures, and weapons, come around to say the guard this, just excavating a little hole in my cell wall. Not to worry, my good man. Oops. No, he couldn't have that, so he came to me and asked if I could get him a Rita Hayworth poster. Not a little one, but a big one. And of course, he had the rock hammer. I remember thinking when I got him the gadget back in 48 that it would take a man 600 years to burrow through the wall with it. True enough, but Andy had only had to go through half the wall, and even with the soft concrete. It took him 2 rock hammers and 27 years to do it. Of course, he lost most of one of those years to Norman, and he could only work at night, preferably late at night, when almost everyone was asleep, including the guards who work the night shift. But I suspect the thing which slowed him down the most was getting rid of the wall as he took it out. He could muffle the sound of his work by wrapping the head of the hammer in the rock polishing cloth. But what to do with the precise concrete and the occasional chunks that came out whole. I think he must have broken up chunks into pebbles. I remember the Sunday after I had gotten him the rock hammer. I remember watching him walk across the exercise yard, his face puffy from his latest go-round with the sisters. I saw him stoop, pick up a pebble, and it disappeared in his sleeve. That inside the sleeve is an old prison trick, but up your sleeve is just inside the cuff of your pant. Oh, yeah, inside the cuff of your pants. And I have another memory, very strong and unfocused, maybe something I saw more than once. This memory is Andy Dufresne walking across the exercise yards on a hot summer day when the air was utterly still, yeah, except for the little breeze that seemed to be blowing sand around Andy Dufresne's feet. So maybe he had a couple of cheaters in his pants below the knees. You loaded the cheaters up with Phil and then just stroll around your hands in your pockets, and then when you felt safe to observe, you gave the pockets a little twitch. The pockets, of course, are attached by string or strong thread to the cheaters. The Phil goes skating out of your pants legs as you walk. The world of War II pals who were trying to tunnel out to use the dodge. The years went past and Andy brought his wall out to the exercise yard, cupful by cupful. He played the game with administrators after administrators. They thought he was because he wanted to keep the library growing. I had no doubt that that was part of it, but the main thing Andy wanted was to keep Cell 14 and Cell Block 5 a single company. I doubt if he had any real plans or hopes of breaking out, at least not at first. He probably assumed that the wall was 10 feet solid concrete and that he succeeded in burrowing all the way through it. He'd come out 30 feet over the exercise yard, but like I said, I don't think he was worried over much about breaking through. His assumption could have ruined this way. I'm only making a foot of progress every 7 years or so, therefore it would take me 70 years to break through. That would make me 101 years old. Here's a second assumption I would have made had I been Andy. That eventually I would be caught and get a lot of solitary time, not to mention a very large black mark on my record. After all, there was the regular weekly inspection and a surprise toss, which usually came at night every second or week or two, or so. He must have decided that things couldn't go on for long. Sooner or later, some screw was going to peek behind Rita Hayworth just because to make sure Annie didn't have a sharpened spoon handle or some marijuana reefer scotch taped to the wall. And his response to that second assumption must have been, to hell with it. Maybe he even made a game out of it. How far can I get before they find out? Prison is a goddamn boring place. And a chance of being surprised by an unscheduled inspection in the middle of the night while he had his poster unstuck probably added some pics to his life during the early years. And I do believe that it would be impossible for him to get away with just an undone look. Not for 27 years, nevertheless. I have to believe that for the first 2 years until mid-May of 1950, when he helped Byron Hadley get around the tax on his windfall inheritance, that's exactly what he did get by on. Or maybe he had something more than dumb luck going for him even back then. He had money and he might have been slipping some little squeeze every week to take it easy on him. Most guards would go along with that if the price is right. It's money in their pocket, and the prisoners get to keep his whack-off pictures or his tailor-made cigarettes. Also, Andy was a model prisoner, quite well-spoken, respectful, non-violent. It was the craziest and the stampers that get their cells turned upside down at least once every 6 months. Their mattress unzipped, their pillows taken away and cut open, the outflow pipe from their toilets carefully probed.